You're listening to Deliberate Living, a podcast that inspires, empowers, and encourages listeners to live life more authentically. My name is Holly Priestley, and I'm a full-time nomad and writer who has been living in my 1997 Ford van since January 1st of 2019. I travel the United States with my dog, learning how to live with more authenticity. I explore different ways people choose to ditch the prescribed life we've all been sold and live on their terms, finding freedom and happiness however they choose. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deliberate Living Podcast. I am your host, Holly Priestley, and this week's guest is Molly Mandelberg. If you've been around any van circles in the western part of the United States anytime recently, she's probably been there. Affectionately, we refer to her as the van circle mom. She's just got a really good energy about her, and she makes everybody feel like welcome and comfortable, but also she doesn't take any shit. And it's a really good combination of skills to have. She has been a nomad for just about 13 years, full-time, traveling all over the world, and she has been living out of her van for the last 3. She's also self-employed and runs a kick-ass business out of her van, coaching other people, helping everybody like reach their potentials. And I think her story is a really cool one, really colorful, really unique, down to earth. And I hope that y'all get a lot out of this week's episode. So without further ado, hello, Molly. How are you doing today?
Hello. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I feel so acknowledged and sweet. Thanks, Holly.
You're welcome. For the people who are listening who maybe don't know you and haven't had the pleasure of sharing a van circle space with you, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and tell us what you were doing pre-nomadic life, so like a lifetime ago, and how you kind of got into this, what you're doing now.
Yeah, more deliberate living. Yeah. I started traveling. I grew up traveling. My mom used to take us to Europe when we were kids. And when I was in college, I studied abroad a couple times because I just wanted to be out in the world. And when I finished my degree at University of Oregon, the only thing I knew was that I wanted to travel. I had started out doing an architecture major and then switched to art because architecture seemed too dictated by commission and I wanted my art to be, free. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. All I knew was I didn't want a desk job. I didn't want a sort of cookie cutter life that anyone else had had before. All I knew was I wanted to travel. So I started working jobs I knew I didn't want to keep so that I could get on the road and travel. And I had this sort of cycle for many years where I would work in the fall and I would travel abroad somewhere warm in the winter. And then I would come back and drive around the country in the summer and go to music festivals and visit friends and family and then start this whole cycle over again. And I was not doing that in a very lavish way. I would make just barely enough to get somewhere. And then oftentimes I would end up working at a hostel or working behind a bar to make enough money to stay traveling and sell my art in the summer or whatever I had to do to keep on the road. So it wasn't glamorous, but it was fun. And I was traveling and doing what I wanted to do and kind of avoiding responsibility, avoiding any kind of path. And in the meantime, I was geeking out. I was reading books. I was learning about people. I was learning about myself. I was healing a lot of my own past trauma and figuring out who I wanted to be in the world. And then one of my adventures led me to California, and I ended up getting stuck in a little town called Half Moon Bay for a year. And while I was there, I ended up taking a trip to New York to go to Omega Institute to learn about past life regression. And that was this sort of domino effect that led to me starting my own business as a hypnotherapist. And that, long story short, led to me teaching other people how to grow their businesses online. So I mostly work with coaches and holistic practitioners, people who trade in wisdom and guidance, and I help them to leverage their work to expand beyond one-on-one services. So to start having courses and programs and launching different offerings into the world and how to use technology to have more freedom in their business so that they're not just working and working and working all the time. And now I get to run, my 6-figure business while traveling the world full time in my van, which seems like I couldn't have possibly intended to get to this point, but roundabout found my way here, which is really satisfying and fun. And now I get to keep traveling and not do it as broken by the bootstraps as I used to. And it feels like I get to make a difference along the way. And, you know, when it's not COVID time, I'm also teaching classes and leading workshops around the country as I travel. But yeah, that's my whole story.
I love it. I think that the progression from I don't want to have an adult life. Like I don't want to have those responsibilities. I don't want to have like a salary and a house and all of those things. I just want to have fun, and I'm going to figure out a way to do that even if it means, you know, shoestringing my budget as far as I possibly
Yeah.
can. I think that evolution from like never even really letting yourself be in like the prescripted life that we've all been, you know, trying to get out of really, um, and just kind of following your own path from the beginning and then kind of figuring out how to make the parts that you like about it work better and how to like elevate the parts that you don't like so that you ultimately, I mean, like not every day is wonderful, you don't like everything all the time probably, but I imagine that like not having to shoestring your budget and not having to like work behind a bar or something like that, has given you a lot more like sense of direction and a lot more purpose, and so you can like deliberately be more nomadic and rather than seasonally.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the key to that happening was like a willingness to be curious and a willingness to ask like, what do I want more of? What do I want to explore here? What are my interests? Rather than being like, I don't know. I have no idea. I was like, what could it be? And sort of being willing to read books or to go to workshops or to have new experiences to try and get a sense of what that frequency of life I wanted to be living was. I think if for those people who might be listening who are like, how the heck do I skip to the part where I figured it out? I
Yeah,
would say curiosity and like a willingness to follow that curiosity is a really key move.
right. So would you say that throughout this journey, because you started it the way that you did and at the time of life that you did, you kind of, I don't know, skipped over like the usual, excuse me, blocks and hurdles that most people have, you know, at this point in life? Like they're already working for somebody else. They already, you know, have tried all these other things. And now, you know, maybe they want to go live deliberately, but they're kind of afraid of it. Like, did you ever have anything that you were afraid of? Or were you just like, I'm already here, I'm doing it?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think every time I bought a ticket to some foreign country that I didn't know anyone and I was going by myself, I would always be really scared the night before of like, what the hell are you doing again? Like, really? And then you land and you figure it out, and that empowers you to be like, wow, I can handle this. Like, I put myself in a very uncomfortable position and I figured out how to navigate it, and that feels awesome because I'm not helpless. It turns out I can take care of myself. What your question is, which is a great question. I haven't been in a lot of places where I had a lot to lose. So I haven't had that career that I was like, well, if I leave this, then what if I can't ever come back to it? Or I haven't had that house of like, if I sell this, am I ever going to be able to have a house that nice again? I haven't put myself in those positions. I mean, right now, if I lost this van, I could probably make another one, to be honest. If I quit my business, I could probably create a new one because I have that sense of I could do it now. But yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of places in my life where I felt like I didn't have what it took to get what I wanted, and I went and figured it out anyway. But the thing I tell most people who ask me about, you know, what if I move to this new place and it doesn't work out? Everything you leave in your life, you can probably go back and have it again.
Yeah.
So it's like there isn't actually that much risk in making a choice and trying a new life out. You know, you might not get that exact same position. You might have to work yourself up to where you've been in your company again. But for the most part, if you leave, let's say Los Angeles to go try out Austin, and you're like, you know what, Austin ain't my jam, Los Angeles is right where you left it. You can go back there and probably your same friends are still there. Like there isn't that much loss that happens when we try something new. So I think it's really a beautiful exploration when people are willing to say, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm going to take a little leap of faith and see if this is more fun, this idea that keeps poking at me, than what I've already been living. You can rehab the thing you left behind most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I got asked that question all the time when I first moved into the van, or like when I left any of the previous jobs that I had. It's like, what are you gonna do next? Like, what if you hate it? Like, well, then I'll just move back into an apartment. There's always gonna be apartments to live in. Like, I'll just get a job. There's always gonna be jobs to have. Like, it's nothing that you do, whether you're pursuing your dream life or pursuing someone else's dream life, like nothing you do is actually like a lifetime commitment, except maybe like having babies.
Yeah.
That's probably a little bit more of a lifetime commitment, but like,
And even then, you never know.
and
They
even
might move out early. They might
yeah,
hate you, want to do something without you. Like, you never know.
yeah. So I think that like as far as the fear of leaving something behind or having something to lose, or like the fear of getting to a country that you've never been to, literally when it's safe to again, or like mentally, figuratively, and not knowing anybody and then also hating it, like you can just fly back. It's
Yeah.
gonna be fine. But I think also one of the biggest things you said was like basically that we are more capable than we ever realize that we are, and the only way you're going to realize how capable you are is by continuing to put yourself in situations that make you uncomfortable, and like approaching your fear with a like, yeah, okay, I'm fucking terrified, but I'm still getting on that plane tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
To see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because who knows what version of you is on the other side of that tarmac or whatever, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And that's one of the things I started to notice early on. Because I mean, I started traveling abroad by myself when I was 19 in college, and I studied abroad for the first time. I flew to Rome by myself and was suddenly in this foreign place with no one who knew me. I found this like thrill and this sort of addiction to being somewhere where nobody knew me. And not just like nobody knew I was Molly, but like nobody knew how I behaved. Nobody knew how I was self-conscious. Nobody knew how confident I was. Nobody knew like how I presented myself in public. Like I could, not to say I'm like a shapeshifter and like I was like faking it, but I could try on ways of being that I might not have tried on if my best friend was there or if like my college buddies were there. I was able to sort of explore what feels good. How do I want to be in my body today? How do I want to be in relationship to other people? How do I want to interact? And like, how loud is my voice? Or like, how sassy am I? Or, just sort of exploring different options and seeing what felt good. And there's a lot of like fun and freedom in that exploration process, where if you're always with other people who know you and maybe people who've known you for years, you might not try out a different way of being. And there might be like other sides of you haven't met yet. So there's something
Yeah.
really fun about that too. Not that I'm saying everyone needs to travel alone at some point in their life, but that's totally what I'm saying.
I am inclined to agree with you. I think traveling alone has been definitely one of the biggest contributors to my own sense of like capability and confidence. Like, what are you gonna do if you're like out on some fucking back road somewhere and you get a flat tire and you don't have any service and you don't know how to change your own flat tire on a rig this size? Like, I did that. That happened. And like
Yeah.
I didn't have any service, and I didn't know how to even get my spare tire off of the bottom of my van, which you should really know before you have to know it. But
Yeah.
I figured it out. And yeah, like just that sense of like, oh, it'll be fine. And at first, when you first start doing it, like when you were 19 and you went to Rome, and you didn't know anybody, and it was the first time you traveled alone. And I mean, the first time you do it, it's hugely scary, but then you get this huge like dopamine rush of like, oh my god, I did it. And then you just keep doing it, and
Yeah.
it's easier and easier. The fear doesn't necessarily go away. Like I bet you still have days 13 years later, where you're still like terrified, but you have all this experience behind you that says like, yeah, but you can do it.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah, they're fewer and further between the more you like step over that comfort line, the bigger that comfort zone sort of expands to. Totally.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are absolutely times where I'm nervous and anxious and don't know what the fuck I'm doing, and then I go and figure it out. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on your show, but I
No,
just
you're
did.
allowed to swear.
Okay.
It's made by adults for adults.
Okay, good.
What do you think are some of the biggest changes that have happened from like your immediate experience being nomadic in general, or like specifically living in a van, or like starting your business or whatever, and now that you've been doing it for so long, what are some of the biggest shifts that have happened? I very rarely have people on the show who have been doing this lifestyle for as long as you have. And I love to ask about like, what happened when you first moved into the van, like the first week, or what happened the first week you started your company? And it's usually a lot like, oh, well, it was a year ago and this is exactly what happened. But
Yeah.
13 years ago, like things have changed.
Things have shifted. Yeah. And I think, I mean, the underlying motivation in general has shifted slightly. Like when I was younger, I was very much running from responsibility and honestly running from community and like a fear of being too well known and too well seen and not being able to live up to other people's expectations, and a lot of like trauma that I was still unpacking and trying to recover from or move through, I guess you could say. And over the years and a lot of inner work, especially starting my business, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, I think about 6, that I had to undergo a lot of transformation just to step into who I was becoming as a facilitator, as a leader, as a content creator, as someone who's showing up visibly online. And a lot of that healing has shifted the underlying dynamic of me traveling. And it's more so now my way of staying connected with other people and my way of being in the lives of the people that I love and of sort of connecting people around the country and around the world to each other more too, by me coming and being in their lives for a little while. So just in general, that's the biggest thing that has shifted. It used to be about running away, and now it's a lot more about running towards.
Yeah.
So that's a fun shift that's happened. As far as living in the van, my first year in the van, I was doing it the way that I used to do summers in my Subaru, which was just traveling like to friends' houses and family members' houses and just going bing, 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 bing to different spots. And as I've been in the van for longer, it's more so I take more time out in nature by myself. I take more time visiting other van friends, people who actually understand this nomadic culture. It wasn't until like almost exactly a year into being in the van that I went to my first van life gathering. And I don't know, I mean, I know you get this, but there are a lot of places in my life where I've found people who understand one side of me. Like I go to Burning Man and those people get that side of me, that like Burning Man side of me. And I go to a business community that I'm a part of and they get that entrepreneurial drive. They get that part of me that like really wants to show up and make a fucking difference. And I had never in my life come across people who got the nomadic side of me, because everybody's like, oh yeah, that's so great, like I love to travel too. And it's like, yeah, but like do you ever just go and like have no plan and like just go? And so coming to a van life gathering where people were like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, don't know where I'm going next, and like, isn't that fun, I love this. I was like, holy shit, these people get this whole side of me that I thought was so different. And there's this whole community of people who share that, and not in like not share anything else really. Like we're all so different and we're all so like special in different ways and creative and passionate about different things, but we share this like deep love for being outside and this deep love for being on the road. And so that was a really big shift that happened for me after my first year in the van. I was like, oh my God, there are people who get that. And now I get to meet up with my van family like you in different places around the country as I go, which has added like this extra element of feeling at home wherever I am, because I know that there's like people who love me and have my back in more places around the country too.
Yeah. So I think that like what looks to be less stable because you're constantly bopping around and going new places is actually more stable because you're building a bigger, broader foundation, literally,
Yeah.
of friends and people who love you all over the world.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I
It's fun.
think,
It's counterintuitive, but it's awesome.
yeah, the difference between like running away from things and running away from community and like wanting to have the freedom to be yourself and be imperfectly yourself, but having this expectation that, you know, your community has an expectation of you that you need to live up to. And then now it's like running towards it, making the community, building community everywhere you go, virtually or in person or whatever. I mean, those are some pretty big shifts, and we talk about community building a lot, especially this year. I think COVID has contributed to it quite a bit. I had an episode of the show recently where we talked only about community building, like the logistics, but also the mental side of it. And it's a challenge, but I think it's something that people are craving these days. And so I think
Totally.
that hearing your story of it and like the evolution of it is really very interesting. um,
Yeah.
what do you think are some of the biggest like pros and cons of a nomadic travel, and b being a business owner? Because that's one thing you said was like, yeah, most people can understand a part of me, like my van people understand my
Yeah.
van side, but my business people, my entrepreneurs, aren't usually overlapping with my van people, and I don't get to talk to people about business very often, but I love talking about business.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, what was the question? Where do they overlap or how do they work
The biggest
together?
pros and cons between nomadic living and then also owning a business.
Yeah. I mean, the pros of nomadic living is you get to be wherever you want. So, like, I noticed when I stopped spending winter in Oregon, where I grew up, that my mental health is dependent on sunshine. And I didn't know that a large, in addition to circumstantial depression or situational depression, that it was also seasonal affect disorder of I just need sunshine to be a happy person. Once I realized that, being able to travel means that I get to be happier more of the time because I get to put my body in sunshine more of the time. So that is a huge pro for me, is literally just the ability to put my body in space where I want it to be so that it can have what it needs, like vitamin D. And right now I'm literally looking at the Pacific Ocean over the top of my computer screen. So that's always a plus. Being able to be where I want to be and being able to spend quality time with my people wherever they are. Like my dad lives in Colorado. My big brother and his 4 kids and wife live in Austin, Texas. My mom's in Oregon. I have a lot of good friends in California. So those are like my main 4 hubs. And I can't pick one place that I want to live, and I don't want to have to pick. So one of the biggest pros is just being able to be in the lives of the people I love, and not like, hey, like let's have dinner once a month, but like, hey, I'm going to come park outside your house for a couple weeks and like be in your life with you and like connect and be together. Which for some people might sound obtrusive, but for the people that I go and visit, they usually love having me there. I think. So that's the main pro. The con, I mean, cons are like simple things. Like some places it's hard to recycle. Some places it's hard to find a shower during COVID. Um, Silly things like that. Cons, it would be nice to have a garden. I hope to have a garden someday and some land. I'd like to build my own house someday. Um, and also, like, there are people that I would like to have just normal life with. Like, I would like to have weekly dinners with all my friends in one town, but not all my friends live in one town. So those are the kinds of cons of being a nomad. It's also interesting building romantic relationships, which I'm sure you've done episodes about recently,
Yeah.
and connecting with people and having either the added pressure of we both live nomadically, now what? Or hey, I'm not here for very long, but let's connect. So there's that sort of a con, sort of a pro also. I think I use it to my advantage most of the time. We won't go too far into that. And then business wise, like I figured out early on as an entrepreneur, I was building a business that wasn't going to allow me to stay nomadic. So I had to really check myself and say, okay, what needs to be rearranged here so that I can be serving my clients exclusively online? And there was a little growing period of like, okay, I have to reorganize everything. And in that reorganizational process, I sort of learned a lot of stuff about running a business remotely that allows me to serve my clients with those same tools now. So kind of my whole business is not about becoming a nomad as an entrepreneur, but it's about setting yourself up so that you have the time and space in your life as an entrepreneur to live the way you want to live. So if you want to take a month-long vacation every year or every 6 months, that your business can sustain that and continue growing. What do we need to set up to make that kind of thing possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really the core of what I teach and what I'm about. And people use that for different things. Some people just want more ease and flow in their business, and some people want to potentially live in a van or travel more nomadically at some point. And there are things to set up and be aware of that allow you to have more freedom so that, you can take the whole weekend or 5-day weekend off and go camping or get off grid or whatever it is you want to do. The cons of running a business, it's feast and famine. People are like, oh, I would love to live that way and have work that way. And it's like, yeah, but you get a regular paycheck. And sometimes I make a whole lot of money in one month and make a lot less the next month. And that's just sort of the name of the game with being an entrepreneur and launching programs and having some months where you'd rather just go be in the desert and not do anything. But that's the main con, is that, it's not as consistently, the income isn't as consistent, and it's all on you. The responsibility is on you to make shit happen and to create the next thing and share yourself with the world so that you're successful.
Yeah.
Whatever that word means.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I think you need to define what success means for you as well. Like the very first episode I did of the podcast was talking about the 4 different kinds of freedom. And I think that that's key in figuring out like what a deliberate life looks like for you, or like what you want out of your business or out of your job or career. And it sounds like that's something that you help people figure the fuck out.
Totally. Yeah. I love your 4 versions of freedom too. I think we talked about that on my podcast.
I think so. I'll link to that show as well in the show notes for everybody who hasn't gotten a chance to listen to it. Molly, is speaking of like the feast or famine nature of running a business, what are the logistics behind being a nomad and an entrepreneur? Like, do you have the same bills every month, or like, how do you make sure that everything gets paid for and all of that? Like, speak on specific numbers if you want to. Don't share what you don't feel like sharing, but the logistics of like living this way is a huge like barrier to some people, because it varies so much, and you can't find like, one definitive answer online, because there isn't one.
There isn't one. It's very much, it depends on the business. And even then, if 2 people are running the same exact business, it depends on the person and what their strengths are and how they want to show up. So there is no answer that fits all. For me, what started to make my income more livable was when I started selling packages instead of single sessions. So that was early on in my business. I was like, oh, if I sell a 5-pack of sessions instead of a single session, suddenly I can pay some of my bills way more easily this month with less effort. So that's the first thing, is if you're doing one-on-one services, give your people the option to buy a package. And for those of you who wonder how that works, the lowest amount you're willing to be paid per hour is your package rate, and your hourly rate is more than that. So if your minimum, I will only go down to $100 an hour, then 10 sessions is $1,000 and a single session is $120 or $150, because your hourly rate should always be more than what they pay for a package, because that's the incentive to buy a package, is they get a cheaper price. Just to break that down for some people. And from there, of course, people listening to this, everybody's aware that passive income is a thing. So like having a home study course or having an online program or having a group that you lead, that is another way to generate income. So my answer to that is have as many income streams as you can come up with, but make sure you get one of them working before you start working on the next one. So like make sure that you don't just create 50 courses without making sure any of them sell, just so you can have 50 income streams. It's like, figure out one income stream. Okay, now I know how to get clients. Now I know how to sell packages. Now I'm going to focus on what that next income stream is, because I've talked to some people. I know what they're asking for. I know what I would like to create for them and what they would probably buy from me. There's a lot you can learn from just having conversations with people who you think are your target audience. And then, so for me, a lot of my my income is more consistent now, because I have people on payment plans for multiple different courses and programs, and those payments come in throughout the month and add up to more than enough to pay my bills. And then if I sell packages and have one-on-one clients, that sort of just keeps putting me over the top and allowing me to pay off debt, allowing me to invest some income, allowing me to catch up on taxes, because I haven't been great at that notoriously. Starting to learn that tax money isn't actually my money, even though it came into my account. I still have to put it in the right place. That's the biggest learning lesson for me. Last year, like I was fortunate when COVID hit that I happened to be already known in the digital marketing space in my niche with my audience. They knew that I was a person to come to figure out how to get set up online. So COVID was actually great for my business. And a awesome byproduct of that was I got to shift how I thought about my debt. And it actually became really fun for me to pay off my credit cards. So now I'm trying to use that mindset of like, okay, that became fun and became really satisfying, which it did not used to be. And so how do I transfer that over to paying my taxes and paying them in advance? And one of the things I think you and I had talked about before was this process of tithing to myself. So I know you use that tithing money to contribute to causes that you care about, which is awesome. And I definitely donate to different charities throughout the year as well. But I also put 10% of every dollar that comes in into a 10% account. And instead of saying, okay, now I've got this saved up, like I could pay off the IRS, I could pay off a credit card, I exclusively am using that 10% account to invest. So I've put like a grand into playing with cryptocurrencies. I've put a few more grand into a Roth IRA. And, you know, I'm in my 30s and I don't have dependents. And I just turn the risk level on that robo investment of my Roth IRA all the way up so that it can play with the stock market at a higher rate. And even though I think last week the stock market went down or whatever, in the next 30 years, there is no possibility that it's not going to go back up to above where it was. So that's been really fun of watching this money that could have just been sitting in a savings account. You just move it over to something like a Roth IRA or an index fund or something. And without having to think about it or worry about it or buy stocks or sell stocks, that money is literally just growing itself more money, which sounds impossible, but it's fucking magical to watch. So if anybody's thinking about this money game, I highly recommend reading the book I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, which gives you sort of the lay of the land. And that was revolutionary in my thinking of like, oh, I don't have to have everything figured out to start investing in my future. And the sooner that I start, the better off I'll be later. So that was a big shift that happened for me in the past year. But yeah, as far as an entrepreneurial journey goes, figure out who you want to be talking to, what lights you up, what you actually want to be sharing with the world, and then figure out how to expand that, how to turn that up a little bit, how would doing that in a bigger way for more people, or making it make a bigger difference. How would that look? What would that be like? Ask yourself big questions, see what comes up, and be willing to learn from people who know more than you to make it happen faster. Because if I hadn't gone to other mentors and learned from other people, it would have taken me a lot longer to get to where I am now. Not just financially, but like energetically as an entrepreneur.
I think that last bit is huge. Specifically like the asking for help part. I only because I have a hard time asking for help. And I think that I need to reinvent all of the wheels all by myself. Otherwise it's not valid and it doesn't count. And that's something I'm working on. But yeah, absolutely. Like ask for help and like be curious and allow yourself to explore those curiosities, invest in yourself, like literally with stock markets and stuff, but also like with mentors and books and podcasts and things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, your journey is definitely going to look different because it's yours. And whatever works for Molly or whatever works for Holly is not necessarily going to work for, you know, I was going to make a bad rhyme there. I won't. But it won't work for anybody.
Holly. Yeah.
Yeah. It won't work for Olia's. What are your future plans for your travels, for your van, for your business? If you're able to, you know, think ahead, or if you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, yes, a mix of both all the time. For my business, I mean, I have, you know, more courses launching soon. And when COVID's gone, I've got desires to apply for TED Talks and stuff like that. I have a book I finished writing this year that I'm promoting right now to agents and publishers to hopefully get that published the traditional route. If not, I will eventually self-publish that so that it's at least out in the world. So that's sort of business-wise. More writing, more content creation, more attacking YouTube intentionally, that kind of stuff. Life-wise, I have no plans to stop living in the van. I do intend to buy property sometime soon. Right now, I'm sort of vacillating between wanting to buy a house with friends and Airbnb out my half of it.
Mm.
Or what I almost did this fall was buy a big piece of land up in northern Washington to build a retreat center on. That's like the long-term vision of my life, is to build some sort of an event space, retreat center, healing center of some kind on a big piece of land, and build an earth ship and have a big garden and homestead with the added edge of having space that people can come and gather and do big work together. Yeah, so I don't know if that's happening in the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, but that's sort of the big vision dream for the future, which I know a lot of people share that vision of buying land and having all their friends come and live on it with them. But
Yeah. Well,
we'll see.
that's the benefit of doing your taxes, is that then you
Exactly.
can better qualify for a mortgage.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
It
awesome.
should be fun. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, when I started playing with that idea this fall, it was almost like it was magically, miraculously guided. Like people were coming out of the woodwork, like, oh, by the way, like I know a realtor up there. And oh, by the way, I have a friend, my roommate's an architect who works with sacred geometry, which is like totally my design aesthetic. And I was like, oh my God, like people are just showing up. Somebody's ready to say, I'm ready to drop everything and throw 10 grand down on the down payment and come help you make this happen. Like so many people were ready to make this dream into a reality. And then I started like pumping the brakes because I wasn't sure the land that I found was the right one. But that's sort of the thing to pay attention to, I think, in life, is when you start to have an idea and there's obvious energy behind it. Like, are we brave enough to keep exploring it and keep dancing with that idea? And I think that's how most of us end up with vans. Is like, that seems like a cool idea. And then we dance with the idea long enough until it actualizes.
Yeah.
So,
I have
yeah.
so many of the things in my life have been that way, and I didn't realize it until someone was asking me, like I was just getting to know a new friend, and they were asking me about myself, and I was just telling them stories, and then a few days later, they called me out on something that I said about, like, I don't know, like things like that don't really work for me. Like I'm pretty deliberate about like what I want and how I do things, and they were like, no, 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 no. Based on what you have told me over the past week, like you kind of manifest shit accidentally all the time. Like you do this. This has happened, with all of these huge things that have happened in your life, and I think that can be part of it. Like you just have this idea, like wouldn't it be nice if, like, I'm going to research it and get into it and like figure it out, and then like bam, the universe is like, cool, I like that for you, here. Have it.
Yeah. Here, you seem like you want that. Here you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to like 17 or 18-year-old Molly looking ahead at the future and trying to figure out like what's happening next, or somebody, in their 30s who's trying to figure out, like, I'm dissatisfied. How do I get satisfied?
Yeah. How do I get satisfied? My biggest advice would be ask questions and stop making conclusions,
Ooh.
period. As much as possible, everywhere you've decided you are something, or life is one way, or reality has some rule about it, it, question yourself, ask your body what it wants, ask your life how it could get better than this. I'm a huge fan of a school of thought called Access Consciousness. I wasn't sure it was going to come up on this call, but I just finished a 3-day class last night about Access Consciousness. So of course it's coming up. If you don't know what it is, Google it, but it's basically a whole bunch of questions that you can start asking yourself to open up new energies and new possibilities in your life. And that would be my only advice, is question everything. And every time you think you know something for sure, like I'm really deliberate about my life. Oh, am I? Or does magical shit sometimes just happen to me? What would magic look like for me today? Who am I today? Who do I want to be today? All kinds of questions you can ask. And what else is possible here? What is this showing up for me for? What's right about this I'm not getting? Like there's so many questions we could be asking to just immediately change the energy in our life. And if you're feeling dissatisfied or you're wondering what's next, ask more questions. And if you're asking a question and you're not getting any new energy or different awareness, ask a different question and see what comes up.
I love it. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Molly, where can people come find you online if they want to follow more of your journey or maybe learn about those packages you were talking about?
Yeah.
How can people find you?
Yeah, Wild Hearts with an S, riseup.com is my business, Wild Hearts Rise Up. And on Instagram, I'm wild_1, that's the word one, ONE _rising. So wild_1_rising. And those are the two best places to follow me. Instagram, you'll get to see my journey and what I'm working on and what my business is up to and stuff. And then my website has my podcasts, links to my van life stuff, and a lot of fun things you can interact with if you're an entrepreneur. There's also a thought leader quiz on there that will give you a tarot archetype depending on where you're at in your business. That's like my pride and joy creation. So definitely check it out. And if you're interested in reading the book that I finished writing this year, my website and my Instagram will be the best place to hear about that when it's finally happening.
Sweet. And I will link to all of that in the show notes as well. Thank you very much, Molly, for being a part of this. And thank you, obviously, of course, every single episode to my audience for tuning in, listening, watching, reading, however it is that you're consuming this podcast. If you got value out of it, if you enjoyed it, please go ahead and hit the like button or subscribe if you haven't already. 5 stars, whatever it is on the platform that you're consuming it on, because that's how the algorithm sees us and gets us in front of the eyes of other people who need this information. If you think this episode with Molly would be perfect for a specific friend or family member or somebody in your life, go ahead and share it with them directly. If you want to help offset some of the costs that go into making this podcast and continue to keep it ad-free, please feel free to contribute via Venmo or PayPal, also linked in the show notes. And tune in next week for another excellent episode. Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
We've reached the end of this episode of Deliberate Living. You can find the show notes and everything we referenced over on my website, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on YouTube, or sign up for email updates every time something new is published. I'll see you next time on Deliberate Living, and until then, keep your life on the DL too.